This is StarTalk Radio. I'm your host, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm an astrophysicist with the American Museum of Natural History right here in New York City, where I also serve as the director of the Hayden Planetarium. And I have with me my co-host for this program, the one, the only Eugene Merman. Eugene,
hello,
welcome
Neil.
back.
Welcome back, me.
We so tap your talents for this. Thank you. And this will not be the last.
No.
For sure.
This would be a fun way to fire me.
And you're still on one of the voices in Bob's?
I'm still one of the voices of Bob's Burgers, also not replaced.
Bob's Burgers.
Yeah.
We'll get back to burgers in a minute.
Yeah.
I have today's show, by the way, is about like food and nutrition. And so I combed the land. Then I found someone who actually has the title, Professor of Nutrition at New York University, Marion Nessel. Marion, welcome to StarTalk.
Glad to be here,
Thanks.
I think.
She thinks. Yeah, so you'll be the judge of that later. We'll find out. First, I'm intrigued and impressed that there's such a thing as a professor of nutrition. So I'm glad that somebody has
He thought of it like alchemy.
There are nutrition departments all over the country.
No, I just never ran into one, and I'm glad you were here and ready for us.
Ready for you.
Because in this episode of StarTalk, we have my interview with Anthony Bourdain. He's the famous TV
Travel chef writer.
Travel chef. In fact, first he had a New York Times best-selling book in the year 2000 titled Kitchen Confidential, Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. Best-selling book.
Which I understand is a very accurate account.
Excellent. And so he's been around a while, and he had a long-standing Travel Channel show called, of course, No Reservations. And this year it was announced that he would do a new show. He's moving from the Travel Channel to CNN.
Yeah.
And he's going to do a show, Cuisines of the World.
Yeah.
So I just chatted with him about what made him tick, what got him interested in food. In particular, what intrigues me, and we'll get back to you on this in a minute, is just how cuisine can be so different around the world. What some people think is nasty, other people think is extraordinary. and how people just eat differently around the world. So let's go to this first clip right away, and we'll have a lot of time to talk about it and carry it into the other segments. My opening clip with Anthony Bourdain, chef extraordinaire. People always say, I've been to this country, and this food is a delicacy there. That's cue to me that the food tastes nasty, or it's some bug that they pulled out of the ground and sautéed. So what's with people saying something is a delicacy?
Well, it's rare or expensive. It's valued more than, the way we look at shrimp or lobster or truffles as the good stuff. A lot of people in this world look at ingredients that many of us would probably have difficulty with. That's an attitude that changes really quickly the more you travel. That something I got over very quickly. Particularly, you talk about, wow, their food in Thailand is really, repulsive to me. I mean, they eat bugs. But the Thais, who are largely a non-dairy culture, try to put yourself in their shoes. They're looking at us. Eat a cottage cheese or Roquefort would be truly horrifying. If you think about it for a second, what that must look like.
What I do find interesting, though, is you go from one country to the next, and one of the simplest measures of this is what is the assortment of flavors that they infuse in their potato chips that they're selling, for example, right? I mean, so in Japan they have like fish-flavored potato chips. We eat fish here, but I don't know that would sell.
There's a whole spectrum. There are whole spectrums of flavors that other countries, other cultures take for granted and require in their diet. The Philippines, there's a whole bitter component that we are almost instinctively not happy with. I mean, they will introduce bile into dishes to give it that welcome bitter note. There's a tradition of rotting things, like fermenting fish, getting it really offensively funky by our standards, just because, I think, out of boredom.
It introduces another flavor.
And it's worth noting also that Western societies, anyway, used to do that. In Roman times, the condiment of choice was essentially something called garum, that was essentially rotten fish guts and rotten fish sauce this was the salt, the principal seasoning ingredient all across Europe. So even our own tastes have changed. I think for a lot of people, the last frontier is the textural thing. If, particularly in Asia, they like, squishy or even rubbery, chewy, or a lot of traditional European cultures, cartilage texture. That's something that we really have a problem with. We tend to like crispy. Once you cross that border, you're someplace special. To get back to your question about delicacies and value, a lot of, I think, you got to ask always, is there an assumed medical component to what we're talking about also? I think a lot of what we consider the really freakiest foods, the eye-popping, why would you eat that? A lot of that has either folk medicine or traditional Chinese medicine applications, or a regular feature in my life in China is if something arrives still wriggling or there's a sex organ involved, it's usually accompanied by winking and banging on the bottom of the table with this will make you strong, many, many sons. You go home and, it's like, oh, God.
Wow. So, Marion, I got to go straight to you on this. When we think of nutrition, I think of things that are tasty that might be good for me. And for so many of the cultures of the world, I don't know that they have an active science of nutrition, but they just simply know what has worked over the centuries, right? So in your studies, have you seen certain foods, is a person more likely to think that something tasty is actually nutritious?
Probably, but the point is that
the physiology of that.
People eat what's available. Before there were supermarkets, and before there was internet food, and before there was food on every corner, people had to eat what was available to them. So they learned to put together a diet that supported life, supported reproduction.
So the empirics of that is, if you died, you didn't keep doing it.
Yeah, they wouldn't be here if it hadn't worked.
So wait, you were saying that people would eat healthy. You would think that ribs were delicious because were healthy because they're delicious?
If you had them.
If you had them, you'd be like, this must be...
Because these people survived. These cultures survived. These populations
So it's self-selecting.
survived.
Yeah.
So it's self-selecting.
The food sources.
So, and we know that healthy diets can be made out of almost anything as long as the foods are varied.
In India, they drink bare aspirin soup.
Yeah, and you don't eat too much of them.
What's interesting is different regions of the world have different diets, and you can look at how long those people live and say, hey, maybe something's going on in their culture that's not going on in my culture. They've talked about the Mediterranean diet that is high in, I guess, olive oils and things. There's the Japanese, broadly the Asian diet, which is very low fat, high carbs. Let's hear what Anthony Bourdain had to say about it. Then we come back and get some of the science of why that may or may not be true. Let's check it out. Tell me about these diets. We call them diets, but it's just the mainstay culinary offerings in various parts of the world. There's lots spoken of the Mediterranean diet or the Japanese diet, and they live a long time. Heart disease is low. From your life experience, is all that true?
No doubt about it. I mean, you go to Crete, for instance.
Well, I guess we know it's true, but
look, if
are we going to credit the food, or because there's no stress, or because how big a factor is the food?
I'm guessing there's, you're a Vietnamese rice farmer. You're working hard.
You're working. Well,
you are working hard, and there is stress in your life, especially if you've been through 3 or 4 wars in the last 30 years.
Yes. All right.
I don't think that's it. I think clearly the ratio in much of the world, the ratio of, I'm a confirmed carnivore, but clearly there's something to be said for cultures where the ratio of meat, of protein to fresh vegetables is completely different. Ours is distorted. Much of the cultures we're talking about, they use meat or bone or protein almost as a flavoring ingredient, very carefully,
condiment,
much more value.
A condiment.
You have delicious, for the most part, vegetables, generally a filler like starch, like whether it's rice or cassava or potato, wherever it is. Clearly, it has an impact on what your body looks like and how long you're going to live. No doubt about it.
All right, now you're over 6 feet tall. In Japan, people hardly get that height. Mm-hmm. So, is it a trade-off between that kind of diet and whether you grow tall?
Well, I don't think it's a trade-off we make anymore because they're getting taller and bigger. There's no doubt about it. As they become fonder of Western food and processed food, I mean, the same thing's happening there as here, the bulking of the world. But I think, yeah, there clearly is. I mean, one of my favorite. I'm not particularly well inclined. As much as it might be good to eat more vegetables and less animal protein, I'm not particularly well inclined towards really hardcore, unwavering vegans. So one of my favorite statistics is that apparently vegans in non-industrialized cultures seem to do very much better than vegans in industrialized cultures. And people were trying to figure out why that was, why they're living longer and seem healthier. And apparently the insect parts and carcasses in rice much higher in non-industrial cultures.
It's left in the product.
Yeah, so basically they're getting a lot more animal protein.
Insect protein. We're flicking away the insects out of our vegetables.
Very high in protein bugs, by the way. People eat those for a reason.
So, I happen to know separately that little people live longer than big people. Mm-hmm. So if you have a culture where everyone's little, then maybe it doesn't matter what they eat.
Leave them alone.
That's why babies live forever.
So in certain cultures, people are just smaller. Maybe that's the biggest driver for their longevity. Or is there much truth in these diets that? What can you say?
The statistics all show that there are plenty of countries in the world that have much better longevity than we do. And they tend to have in common that they eat more plant foods, fruits and vegetables and grains, and they don't eat as much meat and they don't eat as much junk food. And as the American fast food and soda companies...
It's not just fewer calories. It's the actual mixture of...
It has a lot to do with calories.
It's just harder to eat so much parsley that it's as many calories as a burger. I've tried.
Really hard to get fat on parsley. You have to eat roomfuls of it. It's really tough.
Now, Buddha, last I checked, was a vegetarian, and he's generally shown as quite chubby.
Yes, but everybody was bringing him rice offerings all day long.
He had a very high carb diet.
Yeah, all right.
That's
all
the
day
reason.
long.
Okay, so you're prepared to say that if in America, if we want to live longer, cut the meat.
Cut the calories.
Oh, cut the calories.
Cut the calories
and change the balance of the meat.
And change the balance.
Yeah.
Eat more fruits and vegetables. Don't eat so much junk food. Balance calories and love what you're eating.
What does that do for you?
That's my advice.
Meaning find ways to make foods that aren't burgers delicious.
So, Anthony Bourdain, you certainly know the guy, and you've heard of him.
I've met him.
Yeah. And so we've got a clip of my interview with him, filmed previously, but we talked about just being in the kitchen as a place to experiment, what kind of gadgets are available. And when we come back, I want to talk about sort of food science and the science of the kitchen and what that means to you. What do you think of all the gadgets that help people cook food? They make great infomercials.
In almost every case, they're completely worthless. The salad shooter. Do you really, the ultimate salad delivery system, I mean, is cutting lettuce so hard? Something that will cut onions for you is completely insane as far as I'm concerned. There is no better, two good knives, a serrated knife for bread and maybe tomatoes, and a good quality chef's knife is all you need. And a cutting board, a couple of good heavyweight pans, and there's very little that you can't do.
How do you distinguish between tricks, and I don't mean it in a circus sense, but just secrets versus 10 years of doing it? Because you serve a food to someone and say, what's your secret? As though you can just tell that to them and then tomorrow they can do exactly what you made. At what point do you say, look, I've been at this my whole life?
There are no secrets. This is the secret of the restaurant business and professional cooking is there are no secrets. It is a mentoring business. Chefs spend their whole lives learning stuff, and then because of the nature of the business, every few months teach everything they know, invest time they don't have in teaching somebody everything they know so that they can maybe have a Sunday off and that they can count on a crew. It's a military hierarchy, and it is important. There are no secrets. If there are secrets, if there are there are no secret recipes. There are no secret techniques. Everything that you learn in the kitchen, you were either told open source by your immediate superior, and that's been shared with everybody in the kitchen, or you have learned it over time painfully. The ability to tell when a steak is cooked by listening to it in the pan or on the grill, or determining that a piece of fish is probably ready to come out of the pan just from the sound of it. These are things you learn through repetition, and that is the great secret. It's that this is how professionals learn. This is how home cooks should learn. People shouldn't be intimidated by recipes. They should understand that professionals learn through getting it wrong, getting it wrong, getting it wrong, getting it wrong, starting to get it right, eventually getting it right until it became second nature. It's repetition, repetition, repetition. You learn all of these things, even if you don't understand the science behind why your stew is transforming, why it's becoming thick as it cooks longer, why your egg scrambles, why the steak gets dark on the outside when you expose it to heat. You may have no understanding of the science behind that, but you instinctively, of course, through repetition, understand it. You learn to use it, and you count on it.
Now, you've used two words in our conversation as fluently as any scientist that I know. First, E. coli just rolled off your tongue.
Yep.
And tectonic shift rolled off your tongue. So, what is your science background? What did you?
High school science.
High school science. Cool.
High school science, but
it meant you liked it, I guess.
I did, but people talk about things in the kitchens like, what's happening? Why is my steak getting brown? The caramelization of protein, the Maillard reaction. That's kind of cool to know. It helps you out.
I'm betting you didn't learn caramelization of, sugars in high school chemistry. But you
learned it real quick. First time you stick your finger in some, you learn it on a cellular level. How come that's hotter than water? I hadn't counted on that.
It's way hot.
Yeah.
So that interview, I just became so enchanted by him. I felt like I've known him my whole life during that interview. So we're back in the kitchen. You like the kitchen.
I love the kitchen.
Why? It's the one place you can do legitimate science experiments and no one will fault you for it.
Absolutely. And if you're really a good cook, you keep notes on what you're doing. And if you're
a lab book.
You keep a lab book.
If Iran tried to build a nuclear weapon in a kitchen, no one would be so upset.
Yes. So if your cake fails, you try it another way. And
so I'd be curious if on her shelf of cookbooks, she's got lab books of what failed cooking experiments, successful ones.
Yes.
So is there some experiment you remember most that you discovered yourself?
Well, it's just anything that you make. You just keep making it until it works.
I think it's interesting that if you cook protein, it sort of changes.
Yeah, what was he saying when you would burn your finger if you touched sort of...
Did you need him to tell you that you'd burn your finger if you touched...
No, but he said faster than water.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I don't know science, astrophysicist.
Yeah, if you melt sugar and it's liquefied, it's at a higher temperature than boiling water. And it sticks to your finger.
Yeah.
So it'll...
sticky.
And if you look at chefs, you look at their arms and they've got blisters and cuts all over them.
Because they've been fighting food for years in a hot kitchen.
Yeah. Indeed.
So like for example, egg goes from liquid to this fluffy form because you're heating the proteins. I mean, it's an interesting sort of consequence of it.
And cream whips because you're beating air into it.
Right. I mean, I love it. In my interview with Anthony Bourdain, I talked about sort of the animal aspect of eating meat. I mean, if you're going to eat meat, it's a dead animal. Okay,
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay,
not
a debatable topic.
Yes.
But what does it mean to eat something that's been completely, where its origin is completely concealed from you? It's just a burger. It's just a...
Oh, I see. Not like a farm to table kind of thing, but more of like just like buying a big pile of meat or finding it on the ground.
Right. Would you go out and kill
plastic.
the animal if you knew that's what you were about to eat? Let's find out what our conversation
I would punch an animal out and murder it with my fist.
Maybe it's more true in America than in other places, but we shield ourselves from particularly in the carnivorous realm, we shield ourselves from the animal itself. We buy a chicken, you don't see the feet.
Right.
You don't see the head. You don't. It's just packaged and it's just a piece of meat. Is that a good thing? Or, I mean, you're probably going to say
it's
it's
a
a bad
terrible thing.
But why? Why do you even
Okay,
care?
for a whole lot of reasons. It's always good to know where your food came from. It's only fair and just. My friend Fergus Henderson was a pioneer of what's called the nose-to-tail movement. He says it's only polite. If you're going to kill an animal, or more often have an animal killed for your restaurant or your kitchen, it's only polite to eat as much of it as possible, to not waste. People should understand where their food comes from, how it was raised, what the impact might be on society as a whole in that process. But I think also, just as sentient, caring people, a decent person would prefer that their animal is raised reasonably happy and killed with a minimum of cruelty.
But if before everyone ordered their cowboy steak, if they said, go outside, find the cow that you want us to slaughter, look it in the eye, and pull this trigger and shoot it
Honestly,
in its head.
I think that's an experience. The more people who can do,
Cow with big eyelashes,
it is something I've done. When you travel this world, you meet your dinner frequently. It's difficult. When you've killed your first pig, you really start to abhor waste, disrespect to the ingredient. I'm a lot more careful about how I cook my pork now. I understand something died for that pork chop. Okay, I think you become a better citizen of the world and a more rounded person when you have seen that process and you've made some personal decisions as part of that. But it is a life-changing thing, and I think everyone should take part in it.
I think that's deep. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
It's philosophically enriched outlook on the food that you confront.
Many people don't eat meat because they can't bear the idea of either raising animals for food or killing animals for food. People who do eat meat, if they're thoughtful at all, have to come to terms with what that means. And his coming to terms, obviously, is he wants to respect. It has a lot of respect in it. I think that's a philosophical position that a lot of meat eaters have these days.
I do this.
I want my meat raised humanely.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to be killing it, but I want it at least raised humanely.
My one little part of that I do for myself, when I'm eating a shrimp, I eat the shrimp with the shell. I figure the shrimp gave its life, I'm going to eat its shell as well. But plus, it's chewable anyway. It's not like a lobster shell.
Right.
But also,
I eat the lobster shell because I'm a little better than you.
But also, when I cook a lobster, you know what I do? I remove the claw rubber bands before I put it in the.
Oh yeah, doesn't everyone do that?
No, I don't think so. Because
You would boil rubber bands with your food?
No, I want the lobster to have one last chance to bite me before it goes in.
I see.
Right. It's
I guess I selfishly do the same thing because I don't want to boil a bunch of rubber bands. So it's good that we're both good people.
Let's get right to my interview with Anthony Bourdain, where we had just come out of talking about slaughtering animals, facing them in the eye, if you really want to appreciate what you're eating, and the fact that animals are a source of disease in the world. Let's find out. Some pathogens in our culture are directly traceable to viruses that hopped from animals that we either farm or eat, or how does that scare you sometimes? I'm thinking of avian flu or mad cow disease or even AIDS with contact with the rest of the apes.
I think exercising reasonable caution, the same way you would if you travel around rural America, is a useful thing to do wherever you go. I mean, the days when I would eat way as far out of my comfort zone, as a daredevil, just so that I could tell friends that I drank, live cobra blood. I don't do that anymore, and I guess I would advise people against.
You used to do that?
Early on, I was so grateful to be traveling. I didn't think this whole TV thing would last. I'd never been anywhere. So yeah, when I was in Vietnam, I made sure to get the live, still beating cobra heart and drink its blood. Just so I figured when it all ended, 6 months later, at least I'd get a free beer telling that story. I long ago changed the way I travel to be much more interested in the typical everyday thing. I think if you use the same philosophy, people always ask me, do you get sick? Just stomach problems from traveling around eating all that street food. Always ask yourself, is this how your average person eats? Is the place busy? It's generally not going to be a concern. If you're aware that avian flu has become a concern in the area, undercooked poultry is probably not going to be a good idea. You will have to think about those things. If there's mad cow around, maybe calves' brains at a dodgy pub would not be your first option. But I think if you familiarize yourself with what's going on, as any cautious traveler should, and don't take unreasonable risks, eating brains or spine in a mad cow area would be a bad idea.
So just using common sense.
Yeah, just like they're not drinking the water in Russia from the tap. You shouldn't either.
Do as the natives do. Yes. So Marion, how much attention do you give in your profession to not only nutrition of food, but the hazards that the eating of food can bring you when they're contaminated?
Oh, I actually have a book. It's called Safe Food, The Politics of Food Safety.
Practicing safe food.
Yeah. Yes.
Safe food, exactly. You got
Because there's E. coli, botulism, Hep A.
Yeah, the Centers for Disease Control says 48,000 people in America get sick with food poisoning every year, and there's 125,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths. Those are the standard figures. But
So what do you do to avoid this?
I tried it. When I'm traveling, I try to eat food that's been cooked.
Cook the food.
Cook the food. Oh, cooking does wonders.
And
for
never
food
a sandwich
safety.
that you find on the ground. Never eat a ground sandwich in Russia. They
After
always
5
say.
seconds,
Not
I'm
a good,
told.
not more than 5 seconds.
But wait a minute.
anyway.
So you cook the food, but also cooking removes some of the nutrients from food, isn't that
Yeah,
right?
but not seriously.
Okay.
It'll kill a couple of the more dicey ones like vitamin C and folate, but the others will be fine, and you will be so much better off eating cooked food in places where the water's dirty that you'll be grateful that you did.
Okay. But how about the pathogens that are not organic? That like mad cow disease, isn't that just a folded protein or something?
Yeah, that's a folded protein. That's pretty rare.
Hey, what's a folded protein? So, you guys like, yeah, it's a folded protein. Oh, yeah, we know. Let's move on. Because everyone knows what that is.
It's a misfolded protein. That makes it even worse.
What is that?
There are proteins in your body. And this one happens to get into the brain, and it's bad, and it's folded wrong, and it makes others fold wrong too.
Uh-oh, and then your whole brain folds wrong, and a folded brain is a dead brain.
That's
really what
bad.
I say.
Yeah, it's bad.
Okay.
It's bad. You don't want to get that, but it's rare.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to get fold brain.
It's rare.
And how good is cooking at killing viruses as opposed to bacteria?
It's fine.
That'll do that
fine.
too.
Cooking is really helpful if you're trying to kill bacteria and viruses and food.
So it could be one of the greatest contributors to our longevity.
It could.
The fact that we started cooking food back when fire was tamed by cavemen.
Yes.
That
If you boil a person with the common cold, you will kill the common cold. So the question is to find that perfect temperature before they die.
Well, that's kind of what your body does when it raises its temperature. It's fighting bacterial infection. So you were not completely
Wrong.
crazy with that suggestion.
But I want to boil people to kill the virus.
But in fact, your body sometimes doesn't know how high to bring the body temperature, and it can kill itself,
Right.
With a fever, yeah. So there. So I spoke with Anthony Bourdain about food in interesting, more exotic places, like food in space.
Or Rhode Island.
what astronauts eat.
Name one person
or if
who's
we're going to
ever
go
been
to
there.
Mars, or we're going to go someplace. Just food at high altitude. Let's see what our interview there. Later this afternoon, I'm going to be speaking with the space station astronauts, and I'm going to ask them, in part inspired by this conversation, I'm going to ask them, since it is an international space station, do they ever get together and swap each other's foods?
Well, they do. I've spoken to some astronauts about this, and it's really interesting what happens to the palate at altitude and in outer space. Apparently, if you have a stash of hot sauce, you're the go-to guy in outer space. They crave spice and like chili sauce, Tabasco, so some kind of good spicy relish, seasonings.
Something to keep in mind. If our next mission to Mars, would you volunteer to be their chef? Or advise NASA on it?
Really be interested in going to Mars. No, I ain't cooking. I had 28 years of it. Somebody else can bring the food. I'll bring the hot sauce.
You could be the spice man, I guess. How to make the food better.
Well, and it's airline food tastes so differently on the ground and at altitude. They have to, they have to completely reimagine it for what it's going to taste like up there. So I think I'd be given my experience in Southeast Asia. I think I'd be a good choice for the condiment master of condiments.
Marion, I'm intrigued by that. I mean, I conducted that interview, but it didn't hit me until just now that if your taste buds, your brain taste bud connection changes according to altitude, you need a different cuisine at every stratum.
It's why money tastes so good eating in Aspen.
So, I mean, what do you know is known about eating at altitude?
I don't think I don't think the reasons for it are known. It must have something to do with the loss of oxygen tension.
Yeah.
There's just less oxygen.
Less oxygen, and even on an airplane, that is not pressurized to sea level. It's pressurized at much lower, which puts less stress on the fuselage. Because if they pressurize the cabin at sea level pressure, then seals begin to give, and it's.
No, I thought at first you were talking about Seal the animal. And I was
No. Sorry.
Oh, you don't know how planes work. You think they're powered by seals. Oh boy.
And so, and in the space station, the same thing. So they might up the oxygen level to the same per breath, but the total air pressure is going to be less. And we know you can survive in lower air pressure. So that's fascinating.
But things don't taste as good, and it's harder to boil water.
Yeah. Harder to cook an egg. You can boil the water. You won't cook the egg because it boils at a lower temperature.
Oh.
Yeah. You knew that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds
Everybody
familiar.
knows that.
I don't spend a lot of days boiling eggs in high altitudes, but sure, I've heard the thing.
Right, so what happens is as you go to higher altitude, there's less air pressure on the surface of the water.
Right.
And so the water's trying to evaporate itself, and at sea level, and it's fighting all these air molecules. You go to lower air pressure, water's popping up willy-nilly, and so the temperature the water boils is lower. Now you want to cook your 3-minute egg. The egg says, I'm ready for 212, but you only give me 180. So your 3-minute egg becomes a 5-minute egg.
Sounds like you shouldn't be poaching eggs in space, but you should be making omelets on a nice hot pan, right?
Yeah. So we need a whole new cookbook for your
outer space cooking
altitudes.
For the amount we're trying to get to Mars, we haven't thought about how we're going to cook on the way there.
You don't have to feed robots.
We just give them sunlight.
Yeah.
So we should re-engineer humans so that we can run on sunlight.
That would be terrific.
I would love a helmet that absorbs solar energy.
But then it's not as tasty. The food traditions of our world would be gone. We've got to start wrapping this up.
Okay.
Professor Nessel, thanks for coming. And Eugene, and your book is out, just came out a few months ago.
Why Calories Count.
Why Calories Count. I'm all over that. And Eugene, you going to read her book?
I am. I'm actually totally excited to get your book. She should have brought a free copy for me, but I'll get it on iTunes or something.
And that was great. I want to publicly thank Anthony Bourdain again for granting us that interview, and he was such a great guy.
Hi, Anthony. I like your stuff a lot.
And I
like his food.
He was so frank and honest, and he was such a great guy. You've been listening to StarTalk Radio, brought to you in part by a grant from the National Science Foundation. Give a shout out to NSF. Oh, you were NIH people, excuse me. NSF all the way. I am Neil deGrasse Tyson, as always, bidding you farewell and to keep looking up.